So this is going to be part 2 of my series on Oakridge Cemetery. If you got a chance to see the first one, don't worry about it if you missed it. I'll put the link to that in the episode description on this video so that you can find it. And if you take a minute right now to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, you'll see all of my great videos on historic cemeteries and local history stories from around the southwest Michigan area. And if you'll come along with me on this wonderful journey, we're going to learn some amazing history at Oakridge Cemetery here in Marshall, Michigan. As I mentioned in the first video I did on Oakridge Cemetery, it was originally developed in 1839 and consists of 65 acres in size. It is composed of 4 developed sections. The cemetery is quite large and has approximately 15,800 burials and is one of the oldest and historic operating cemeteries in Michigan. The cemetery is managed by the Department of Public Works in Marshall, who is responsible for the general care of the cemetery grounds. It is a place that is interesting to explore and visit, and it is very rich in history. All of the stories I'm going to feature in this video are taken in part from a book entitled Biographical Review of Calhoun County, Michigan, which was published in 1904 by Hobart Mather Chicago. The book sought to capture profiles of notable people from the area so that the details of their lives would not be lost. At the time this book was written, many of the people featured within were still alive, so I have also endeavored to find additional information on what happened to them from newspaper accounts and obituaries when possible. We will begin by looking at the life of Miles Townsend, who was born just outside of Ypsilanti, Michigan, in July of 1841. His parents were Louis Townsend and Maria Trumbull. Louis's father was Ezra Townsend from Monroe County, New York. Ezra came with his family to the Michigan Territory, settling in Washtenaw County as one of the early pioneers who settled there. Louis Townsend, also born in New York, grew up in Washtenaw County and would eventually purchase his first farm there. He remained there until 1851, when he sold that property and purchased a large farm in Marengo Township in Calhoun County. He would develop this farm into a high level of cultivation. He continued his work on this farm until he sold it to acquire an even larger one of over 200 acres in the same township in 1868. There he would remain until he eventually retired into the village of Marshall and would reside there until his death in 1894. Miles Townsend was 10 years old when his parents moved to Marengo Township, and he was reared into the life of a farmer. He received only limited educational advantages growing up, and it was ever a matter of deep regret to him throughout his life that he had not enjoyed better privileges in that direction. He attended the common schools in Marengo Township, and he managed to attend 1 year of school at Olivet College. But on the eve of that first year, he had taken ill with measles, and a relapse of this left him nearly blind for 3 years. Despite this lack of full college education, he had been an extensive reader and supplemented his knowledge with books. He devoted most of his attention to studying the agricultural subject, and over the years acquired extensive knowledge concerning the best methods of operating his land and enhancing productiveness. It was described that in his early boyhood days, he was trained to work on the farm and became familiar with labor of field and meadow. With added knowledge over the years, he put into practical use, imparted to him through his studies of agricultural science. He remained at the home of his parents until he was 22 years old in 1863, when his father gave him a team of oxen and a few of the necessary agricultural instruments, and he set out on his own. He began by farming land on shares, and he would marry Harriet Newton in 1866. In time, he saved enough money to purchase his own small farm in 1870. The following year, he sold that farm and bought a larger one of 111 acres near Battle Creek. In 1878, he again sold that farm, and this time he invested in a 100-acre farm in Marengo Township. and he equipped it with modern improvements, transforming it into one of the model farms in the county. There he remained working the farm continuously until 1895, when he moved to Marshall. He continued to operate his farm remotely with laborers, and in 1897 he erected a large home in Marshall on the corner of Kalamazoo Avenue and Prospect Street. The home was built to plans of his own design and was considered a model of beauty within the city. His wife Harriet would pass away in 1898, and he again remarried to Gertrude Gilman in September of 1899. Over the years, he and his wife were very active members of the Christian church and held several positions within its ranks. In 1899, he was honored by being elected as a mayor of Marshall, and after serving 1 year, he declined any further nominations. His administration during that 1 year, however, was regarded as the most beneficial one for the city, for during that year, the fine stone and cement bridge over the Kalamazoo River was built, and the sewer system was instituted. Over the years, he continued to invest in land for farming, and at the time of this biography in 1904, he was the largest landowner in the county, having over 800 acres. He also owned farmland in the state of Kansas. He was known later in his life to be quite benevolent and a kindly spirit, often giving generously to those less fortunate than himself. He was also a supporter of the Defiance College in Defiance, Ohio, and served as a member of the advisory board there. In his later years, he would move to California, seeking a warmer climate. Miles Townsend passed away in July of 1913 in Riverside, California, at the age of 72, and he was laid to rest at Oakridge Cemetery next to his first wife, Harriet. Gertrude, known to everyone as Gertie Townsend, would remarry James Milton Davison in 1919, and she would pass away in 1952 in Riverside, California. She's interred at Olivewood Cemetery there. The next grave site we're going to visit is that of Dr. Frank Glen Powers, who was born on a farm in Climax Township in Kalamazoo in December of 1869. His parents were James Powers and Irene Keyes. James Powers was a prominent farmer in the Climax area, and he had enlisted in Company D, 12th Michigan Infantry, as an infantry replacement in 1864, and he was married to Irene the very next day after his enlistment. Upon his return from the war, he and Irene would have 2 sons, of whom Frank was the youngest, and become a successful farmer. Frank grew up, as many young men did at that time, working on the farm until age 17. He attended district schools and worked on the farm in the summer months. In order to improve his education, he entered the Seventh-day Adventist College in Battle Creek, in which he completed a 4-year course and graduated at that college at the age of 21. He paid his way through school with his own labor. Following graduation, he engaged in teaching for a year and then entered the office of a dentist over in Vicksburg, Michigan, and pursued the study of dentistry while working there. Deciding it was his calling, he attended the dental department at the University of Michigan, where he would graduate from in 1896. Soon afterwards, he moved to Marshall and opened his office and engaged in the practice. His practice would grow into one of the most successful dentistry offices in Marshall. In 1897, he married Miss Florence Maud Cooley, and together they would have 3 children. He would also serve 2 terms as an alderman in Marshall, and was involved in many organizations throughout the years, including the Knights of the Maccabees, the Odd Fellows, and the Knights of Pythias. He passed away in Kalamazoo in 1946 at the age of 75, and he is buried at Oakridge Cemetery. Marvin Ferguson was born in Yates County, New York in 1843, and would become a leading and practical farmer in Marshall, and also serve in the state legislature. However, he would also be a driving force behind a leading manufacturer in the transportation industry of his day. He was the son of Walter Ferguson and Miranda McAlpine. His great-grandfather, Peter Ferguson, had immigrated from Scotland when the country was still a colony of Great Britain. He originally took up land in Vermont when he was just a boy. He would grow up to enlist in the War of 1812, and following that, moved to New York. After Walter married Miranda, he engaged in working a mercantile store before he took up farming. Marvin Ferguson attended public schools in New York and later attended the Academy of Penn Yan in Yates County. In his youth, he worked at his home with his father as a clerk in the store in Geneva, New York. It was then that he took up an interest in the political affairs around him, but never sought public office. While living in New York, he married Miss Anna Ellerington in 1875. He afterwards engaged in farming as his father had transitioned over. He remained in New York until 1883, when he came to Marshall, Michigan, and purchased a home on Mansion Street with a farm of 175 acres, much of which was within the city limits. He was also successful in the dairy business and became the largest milk dealer in the city. He would retire from that business in 1902 and devote his energies into general agricultural pursuits with his farm. He would become engaged in the industrial pursuits of the city as well and became the original stockholder of the Page Buggy Company. He was the director from its organization and as of 1904 was the vice president. The Buggy Company had grown to an extensive enterprise and with a large and well-equipped plant employing 90 skilled workmen. The Page Buggy Company grew to become one of the most profitable manufacturing industries in the city of Marshall and served as a vast, important trade interest to Marshall as well as to the owners, yielding splendid dividends to its investors. Their products were shipped to all parts of the United States and to some foreign countries as well. Marvin Ferguson was also connected with the Wagon and Windmill Company as well within the city of Marshall during its existence. He still held a deep interest in politics, and this continued even after his move to Marshall and his agricultural and business successes. He was elected as an alderman in 1887 and held the office for 2 years, and then in 1896 he was elected as a member of the state legislature. He was later elected as a mayor of Marshall and served on the board of trustees as the secretary of the Dulcinea Home for Aged and Indigent Women. He was one of the original members of that board in its formation, helping to erect the beautiful home. The Dulcinea Home has its own amazing story, having been established from funds provided in the estate of Dulcinea Daly, a widow with no heirs. I covered this story in a podcast episode, which I'll put a link to that in the description of this video. Marvin and Anna Ferguson became the parents of 5 children, and the family remained prominent in the community for many years. Marvin Ferguson passed away in July of 1909 at the age of 67. He was long remembered as an active member of the community for his upright and just character, along with his industrious habits. A memorial service was held in his honor at the Dulcinea home after his passing. His wife Anna would pass away in 1935, and they are buried together at Oakridge Cemetery. John Conrad Kuechle is the next story that we're going to explore. He was a successful baker in the Marshall community and was born in Bridgewater in Washtenaw County, Michigan in 1851. His parents were Philip Kukul and Marie Reen, both natives of Württemberg, Germany. His father, Philip, was a butcher in his native land, but not finding that opportunity in his line of work, he immigrated to America in 1846, where they located to Bridgewater, Michigan. The following year after his arrival, he married Marie. In 1855, he moved his family to Marshall, Michigan, and from 1859 to 1866, he operated a meat market until he eventually sold that business. He would remain active in the community until his death in 1903, and he and Marie would have 6 children. When John Conrad Kuechle was 14 years old, he found employment away from home with a blacksmith, where he worked for 2.5 years. He then learned the trade of a baker under a man named John L. Evans, with whom he would remain with for a number of years. He would eventually purchase the business from Mr. Evans and would remain in that business in the community the remainder of his life to a tremendous success. In 1866, he married Elizabeth House, who was born in St. Thomas, Canada. Together, they would have 2 children. John would also serve the Marshall community as treasurer for 2 years, and later as an alderman for 2 years. He would also serve as a member of the volunteer fire department. Despite being born in the USA, he grew up in a German household and spoke the language fluently. In 1902, he made a trip to Germany on the Kronprinz Wilhelm, which broke all previously held records in crossing from New York to Bremen in 5 days, 9 hours. He spent 8 weeks in Germany and then traveled to Switzerland. He also traveled to the World's Columbian Exposition in 1893, as well as up and down the east coast of the United States. He retired from the baking business in 1931. He would remain active in city affairs all of his life in Marshall, and was an active member of the Maccabees and the Knights of Pythias. He passed away at his home on Hamilton Street in March of 1938 at the age of 86. He had lived in that same street in Marshall with his wife and family for 78 years. The final story we're going to explore in this video is the life of Dr. Warren Franklin Roberts. He was born in Livingston County, Michigan, to Eliphat and Betsy Roberts in June of 1862. His father was also a medical doctor and had practiced in Pinckney and later in Detroit and Farmington. In 1873, he came to Marshall and established a large medical practice. His professional cares made such heavy demands on his time and energies that his health was undermined, and he died at a young age of 54 years. In his boyhood years, Warren Roberts attended school in Farmington and later in Marshall. From a young age of just 7, he developed the skill as quite an artist, and he would go about the country sketching animals. He made arrangements to study with E.H. Dewey, who was a leading livestock artist connected with various stock journals at the time. When he made arrangements as a teen to travel to Dewey's studio, his father met him at the depot and told him not to go, indicating that he had other plans for him to train as a portrait artist. Later, his father would determine that his son should enter the medical profession instead. He began his studies under his father's direction and later went to Hathman Medical College, where he graduated with the class of 1884. He began his professional career as a doctor at his father's practice in Marshall, and later went to Cassopolis, where he remained there for 3.5 years. After his father's death, he returned to Marshall and took over his practice and made it quite a success. He was a well-known doctor in his community for many years. Dr. Roberts married Miss Minnie Parkes in 1895, and she would survive him. He passed away in March of 1913 when he collapsed on the sidewalk when walking home from the drugstore from an apparent heart attack. He was just 50 years old. Well, that's going to conclude today's journey through history here at Oakridge Cemetery. If you liked today's video, please take a minute to hit the like button down there, subscribe to the channel, and be sure to check out my podcast, Tales of Southwest Michigan's Past, where I get to carry a lot more stories than I don't always have time to bring to film. So be sure to check that out. And once again, thanks for watching.